Hi, everyone. It's Reena Jadhav, and welcome to another episode of Healthier, where we are on a mission to helping you get your health back naturally. And today we welcome Megan Ramos. Hi, Megan. Welcome.
Hi, Reena. Hi, everyone listening. It's great to be here.
Megan is a clinical educator and researcher. She is the CEO and co-founder of the Intensive Dietary Management Program. She designed the IDM program after she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. She believes that both what you eat and when you eat matters. And so her program focuses on when to eat. They utilize therapeutic fasting as well as time-restricted eating protocols with the patients to help them reverse their type 2 diabetes and achieve sustainable weight loss, which, God, if you're like me, you know how hard that can be. They encourage their patients to eat real foods, adopt a low-carb lifestyle in addition to fasting. Megan, tell me a little bit about why did you start IDM? What's the genesis of the program?
So, my colleague, Dr. Jason Fung, and I, our backgrounds in nephrology. I was from the research side of things. He was the nephrologist. And together we focused on research that dealt with preventative medicine. So trying to diagnose kidney disease earlier so we can be proactive and limit the number of people who need transplants or have to go on dialysis. But most of our patients had diabetic kidney disease, and it didn't matter. You could diagnose kidney disease on day one that the kidneys stopped functioning 100%, but it didn't matter. There was nothing you could do for the kidneys other than to treat the diabetes. So it was getting really frustrating. My colleague Jason, at the time, he was almost 40. What am I doing with my life? I'm just watching people die. And then I was going through some mid-20 personal trauma and turmoil. And in a year, I gained like 80 pounds, and that 80 pounds came along with diabetes. Mind you, when I was really skinny, I had fatty liver and polycystic ovarian syndrome too. So I've always been obese, but I've been skinny fat, and then I was just fat. So between 26 and 27, I became fat, and I became diabetic. And I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes right before my 27th birthday. And to me, that was just like the worst thing ever. I've had cancer, and that wasn't as scary as this, because at least with cancer, there's hope, especially when you catch it early. My diabetes was diagnosed early, but there's no hope. And it was just, I just broke down. Like, even my family doctor, she didn't know how to deal with me because I was so hysterical, and she's given me lots of bad news over the years. But like, this was just terrible. And I got it together. I was like, I wasn't going to die from this. And I knew Jason was just so frustrated too, and he had been doing all kinds of research. And I approached him, and I'm Canadian. I'm like 8th generation Canadian, but my heritage is Irish and Italian. I grew up eating carbs on carbs on carbs. I grew up in one of the first generations where both parents were working. So pizza night Mondays, Chinese food Fridays, like we ate a few times at home. I was brought up in the first generation where you bought snacks to school for recess time. My dad didn't grow up that way. So it was totally different eating habits. I was in bad shape young, and I emotionally dependent on food. I watched, my father's a trial lawyer, and I watched Daddy come home and be angry. Daddy eat pasta and drink chocolate milk and have some chocolate cake and eat potato chips, and Daddy was really happy. So I learned to cope with all life's problems eating that way. That's why I got so obese from 26 to 27. I was going through a lot personally, so I found comfort in McDonald's. And so Jason was particularly interested in fasting and religion, because we had just gone through another cycle of Ramadan in our clinic. It was run as the most multicultural diversity in the world. 30% of our patients participate in Ramadan. And, he was sort of at the point where he was just trying to think of anything, and he noticed a lot of these patients had improved blood sugar levels, episodes of hypoglycemia, having to come off their insulin as a result. And a friend of his simultaneously was fasting for religious reasons. She wasn't fasting for Ramadan, but other religious reasons, and noticed some improvement in her blood sugar levels too. So he gave me a stack of literature on fasting and religion, and I started reading it, and I said, okay, you've got 27 years of bad eating habits, not knowing how to eat properly, emotionally depending on everything with with food, and I was going through a divorce at the time. So I just was completely emotionally dependent on chicken nuggets at the time. And I thought, okay, all right, let's figure out, if I can't change what I eat right away, let me figure out when I eat, that part. Maybe if I, get my meal timing under control, I can get to a healthier position. Life will be emotionally a bit better, and then I can start work on undoing 27 years or horrific eating habits and behavioral habits. So I did. So I slowly, I did make huge drastic changes in my diet within 6 months, but my diet's been a real evolution over the last 8 years. But within that 6 months, I had no PCOS, no fatty liver, no
Wow.
diabetes. I lost 60 of the 80 pounds that I had gained. I've lost 86 pounds to date, and I've kept it off for several years now. And that was just, my eating wasn't perfect. Like each week was better than the week before, and each month was better. But really changing what I ate when I ate had such a dramatic impact. And we looking at our patient population, and sure, a lot of them grew up like my grandmother, no multiple snacks a day.
Mhm.
They ate butter and eggs. So really getting them to make changes to their diet wasn't going to be too hard, but the whole behavioral aspect of it, and just how society is overwhelmed with sugar nowadays. And these people were all sick, like they were all on the verge of dialysis or needing transplants, and it was just going to take too long with them through diet. We started off with diet first, but it was taking too long. And, if I had that results in 6 months without my diet being perfect yet, this is what we needed to do, because these people all needed to get better in 6 months, or they were going to be dead or dependent on an organ from someone or a machine to keep them alive. So we wanted to really attack these people aggressively, because it takes time to change their eating habits. And so I had a lot of luck. Our colleagues all thought we were crazy, but they saw how great my experience was, so they became open-minded. And then all of my research patients, at the time I was doing a study with 2,800 patients,
Wow.
and they saw me come back to life, or saw me living for the first time, and they said, we don't care what you're doing, we want to try it. We're not even hungry in the morning time, we just eat because they tell us we have to.
So
So
true. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I think is something we made up, and now we are forcing people to eat when they're not hungry, which doesn't make sense.
yes. So that's how we started. So our first clinic day was on June 5th, 2012. I've worked with Jason since I was a kid, a very little kid. Actually, I was 15, but mind you, he was a kid too at the time. He was a brand new doctor, and so we have a strong friendship. And so we formulated this program sort of based on my experiences, and then shaped it around my experience, and then molded it to each individual, different lifestyles, different personality types, different disease protocols, and we developed the intensive dietary management program.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about different kinds of fasting, because that's the core of your program, is when to eat.
Mhm.
Intermittent fasting is clearly one kind of fasting. How do you define fasting, Megan?
Fasting to us, we really look at fasting as a therapeutic experience to us. So with fasting, we define fasting as a period of time where you abstain from consuming anything in the body that's going to raise your insulin levels. Now, most of the patients we work with are obese or have type 2 diabetes, and both of those conditions occur because of toxic levels of insulin in the body. So we really want to avoid putting in substances in the body for a period of time that elevate those insulin levels. So water is definitely a safe bet. Tea and coffee are also safe bets if they're black. They're not going to have any real effect on hormonal levels. Coffee does in some individuals, but not all. So, we sort of see how an individual does on coffee. We would know they're having a hormonal response to coffee if their blood sugar levels go up dramatically within 2 hours of drinking that cup of coffee. And some people experience that and some people don't. Uh, and tea seems to be fairly benign, different herbal teas. When a patient is new to fasting, we encourage them to drink some bone broth, but then we have them cut that out on the fasting day. I will admittedly say I had lunch before this podcast because I'm going to be doing some fasting. I just got back from a trip and I'm trying to heal my body after having a bit of an infection getting home. And I had bone broth at my lunch, but I'm not going to have bone broth at my fast. I think bone broth is wonderful for you, and it's a great tool when you're new to fasting, but it's a training wheel, and you should eliminate the training wheel. Bone broth has a potential to have an insulin response. So we like to keep the fluids pretty low. We want to avoid putting anything in the body that has an insulin response. And we also want to avoid putting stuff in the body that provides the body with energy, because we want the body to be forced to utilize our own energy stores. All of the excess fat in our body, it's just like, if you think of your fat pouches, there's just like stored canisters of gasoline, leftover fuel from previous meals that you never use. So you stored it in the canister. And we want to force our bodies to utilize that.
That makes a lot of sense. How many hours of fasting do you typically do yourself? And then we can talk about what the program entails.
Yeah, so I am myself, and this is still today what we is sort of our gold standard for most of our patients while they're combating metabolic syndrome, is three fasts a week, ranging from 24 to 42 hours. So we found that the best frequency that allows people to sort of out fast their diet is about 3 times a week. It takes people a long time to combat their dietary issues and behavioral issues. So you need to be able to outfast the diet a little bit. That occasional, bowl of pasta that might happen at your grandma's house on a Sunday, eventually those habits, everything changes. I'm Italian who hasn't had pasta in like 4 years. My grandmother on her deathbed couldn't understand. And for me, I never thought I would get there. Like, it just seemed so foreign. And I was even low carb for a few years before giving that up. So I did the 24 to 42 hour fasts a week. I would pick Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, my busiest days at work. I could easily do a 42-hour fast on a Monday because you feast more on the weekend socially. So I was very satiated. Wednesday, middle of the week, just crazy, trying to get professional and personal stuff organized for the weekend. So it was usually easy to do a 42-hour fast on a Wednesday. Fridays, I would do a 42-hour fast if I was just going to go home and put on my pajamas and put on a face mask and sort of zone out and for the evening. But if I was going if I wanted to be social and engage with friends or family, I would just do a 24-hour fast. So I just fast throughout my workday, made my workday a whole lot more efficient. And I got to leave work a little bit early because I would work through lunch and get stuff done and be able to beat traffic on the way home, get ready, and then meet friends or family at a restaurant and be relaxed and able to enjoy my evening. And that's still what we do today. We've found that hands down, that works the best with patients. Of course, when I hit all my target goals, my weight loss goals, my fatty liver, all my PCOS, like my fertility hormones, I went from perimenopausal to super fertile. My diabetes, when everything improved, my appetite was so different than what it was before. Like, I used to have a hard time going 30 minutes without eating right leading up to my diabetes diagnosis. Like, 30 minutes felt so long. I was paralyzed with thoughts of hunger or desire to eat, not physical but mental. It was really really a struggle, but just not super hungry. So I typically eat once a day, sort of Monday through Friday. Friday sometimes we eat twice, my husband and I. On the weekends we usually eat twice. We have longer days on the weekends. It's more relaxing, it's more social. So we find that a lot of patients follow the same experience that I have. Their hormones are regulated. My insulin used to be through the roof, which was a good sign that my hunger hormone, my primary hunger hormone, ghrelin, was also through the roof. But once all of that's regulated, you eat to feel well. You're eating delicious, good, fatty, low carb foods. It's very satiating. So my husband and I usually eat sort of between about 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock, just sort of depending on the nature of our day and my clinic schedule. And, uh, and that's usually how we go Monday through Friday. We can't imagine eating more now.
So
It's
it's
really
one meal a day. So it's basically one
yeah.
meal a day between 1 to 4. And then how many calories in that one meal, Megan?
I eat pretty well. I would say probably eat close to about 13 to 1500 calories
Okay.
in that one meal. I'm 5'1". I'm about 105 pounds, so
Okay.
I'm petite. My husband does eat a lot more than me. He's 6'4". He's a
Oh,
bigger
wow.
guy. Yeah, he probably eats about twice as much as I do at a serving or at a meal. I find that I'm very satiated I follow a ketogenic diet and around somewhere between 13 to 1500.
And so almost 5 days a week. You mentioned three fasts, but really it's 42-hour fast. So almost I'd say sounds like 4 to 5 days a week you're not eating.
Well, with the 42-hour fast, so 42 hours would be from dinner on Sunday to lunch on Tuesday.
Right.
So Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, 4 days of the week, you're eating twice.
I see.
But on, yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, you would just fast those days.
Okay, got it. Got it. What is so that's for someone who's looking to lose a lot of weight. How does that compare to intermittent fasting, which is typically a 16 or a 14 to 16
Well,
hour window? Talk a
this
little bit
is
about that.
where definitions of intermittent fasting differ. I was actually just giving another podcast earlier today, and at our clinic, we find with most people who have a history of dieting, trouble keeping weight off, poor metabolic rates, 16 or 18 hours of fasting, that's what we have people do on a regular day. We don't consider that to be intermittent fasting or really fasting at all. We just consider that to be a healthy way or healthy approach to a day that you're going to eat. So for us, the most benign intermittent fast we do is 24 hours.
Oh,
And
wow.
even in the 24-hour mark, you don't see a whole lot of the therapeutic benefits of fasting. Those really don't start to kick in till around hours 33 to 36. So when you're looking for anti-aging properties of fasting, so autophagy, where you get that deep cellular recycling, the body breaking down old sick proteins and repairing new proteins, or creating new proteins, not repairing, creating new proteins, ridding the body of bad toxic cells. So for a cancer patient, looking to try to starve off their cancer with fasting, you're looking at doing about somewhere between 30 to 36 hours of fasting to achieve those kind of therapeutic benefits. We think that 16 to 18 hours is just great for a healthy person looking to maintain their health. 18 hours is about what we do on weekends, Saturday and Sundays. That's what we consider in our program to be an eating day, just not over fueling the body and letting the body have a chance to rest. I have a young uncle. He's in his early 40s, and recently he wanted to lose about 20 pounds, and he's never had a history of dieting, and his eating habits aren't all that poor. So I recommended sort of a 16-8 lifestyle to him, and he works at home and he can eat breakfast and lunch and skip dinner because that works better for his life. And he lost his 20 pounds in a couple of months, but he had no metabolic issues. So it's just a healthy way of living, to prevent disease and to maintain good health. But we really don't see it have a dramatic impact on, severe diabetes, even benign diabetes, and people with a lot of hyperinsulinemia. So really high levels of insulin causing disease within the body.
And is that safe also for someone maybe on the thinner side? So is it safe for all levels of fitness and health, or is it primarily that only if you're obese should you be going into a fast that's 36 to 42 hours?
No, it's absolutely. I work with a lot of professional athletes too. So someone who's talked publicly about working with us is George St. Pierre. He's world middleweight, heavyweight champion. I don't know of the, the UFC. Sorry, George, if you're listening. And he's got a bunch of belts, and he's going to potentially be the greatest MMA fighter in history.
Nice.
And he's, of course, like 7% body fat if you look at him. But and he was just recently on a Joe Rogan podcast talking, and he does like 48 hours of fasting, 4 days of fasting. He just stays hydrated. He feels so good, and it's helped a lot with his colitis. So now he's feeling good. He's able to fight again and train like regular again. And we keep a close eye on his body composition. His whole team does. I mean, he's a pretty successful guy, and he's got quite the team. And his body composition hasn't changed. Like, he's maintained his muscle mass. He's actually improved his muscle mass because he's been able to go back to training. So he's been doing typically like a 4 to 5 day fast once a month, and a 48-hour fast once a week, and a bunch of 24-hour fasts to help treat his colitis. I work with a lot of professional baseball players that are mostly pitchers and have a lot of inflammation in their shoulder. And these guys, again, are like 10% body fat or less. There's been the odd one that's been a bit more, but they're typically in good shape. But we fast for their shoulders, of course, with our metabolic patients, we encourage them to stop eating on their eating days at satiation. And then they'll fast on their fasting days. With these very thin people that we work with, we encourage them to eat a little bit beyond satiation, and not largely beyond satiation. Like, eat an extra 2 ounces of steak at dinner. Add an extra tablespoon of olive oil to your salad. Like, eat a little bit more on your eating days. Don't eat till you feel uncomfortable, but just a little bit extra till you just don't want to eat anymore, just so you get a little bit more fat in the system, and that just to help carry them over into their fasting days. So it works really well. I tell you, we do have a lot of people who come to us. I've worked with over 8,000 people now doing fasting over the last 6 years, and a lot of them are sick, but there are a lot of people who are healthy who say, nope, I watched this happen to my grandmother, my parents. No way. I know that food, those medications, all of that's poisonous. So I want to stay healthy. And so periodically we'll do longer fasts with them. And, until they get into sort of their more ideal shape, even if they're, like, say, a female at 25% body fat, until they get to the optimal shape that they'd like to be in, even though they're in a good starting position, we'll do more aggressive fasts, and then we'll scale it down. So for someone who's just thin and healthy and looking to stay that way, we'll have them do 16-8 or 18-6 on a regular basis, and then maybe once or twice a week do a 24-hour fast, and maybe once or twice a year try to do something a little bit beyond 24 hours, maybe 3 days, maybe 5 days, maybe up to 7 days of fasting, just a few times throughout the year.
But what are some of the myths that you found in fasting? I've heard quite a few. Before we started recording, you were sharing some very interesting thoughts on some of the myths that are out there. Share those with our audience, please.
So I guess myths are biggest beefs that I have with fasting. I find this is just general with North American society, is that we have the attitude that if something's good for us, it must be great for us in excess. And that's never the case. That's never the case with anything in life. So when Jason and I first started our fasting clinic and utilizing our fasting protocol several years ago with patients, no, fasting wasn't accepted. But fast forward to 2018, my husband's American, and we live in Canada, but we were in the US, in the state of Florida for the holidays. And it was like January 2nd, and my mother-in-law frantically was calling me from the bedroom to come downstairs. And I go, and she's showing me every morning talk show, fasting, it's all the rage. It was a diet of 2018, or they were calling it time-restricted eating. And she's like, look, it's so exciting. It's on the news. Like, people are finally accepting like what you do. So now that fasting's become popular and people are understanding the benefits of a little bit of fasting, they have the mentality that a lot of fasting is better for them. So when one day of fasting might be good for you, the mentality that I'm seeing with patients, with clients I work with people on social media, in groups that I'm part of, or our groups, it's that if one day is good, 120 days must be good. And that's so not the case. It's just as important to feast as it is to fast. We're not a very bright species, mankind. I mean, we're not bad, but we're not bright, but we're a highly adaptable species. And that's why we've been such a successful species on this planet, is we can adapt to any situation. Now, I just had one patient, I'm going to out him. His name's Paul. Now he's all over our social media talking about his experience fasting. And yesterday he was saying how he can't wait to be in our next book. He wants us to share a story with the world. Well, Paul had the goal of doing a 120-day fast, which is something we never, ever recommend. Ever. We would usually stop a person after fasting for 7 days. And even then, a 7-day fast is something we recommend only at most a couple times a year, a few times a year. So, and that's for someone in really bad shape. So Paul had this idea that he wanted to do 120 days. So we told him that we didn't condone it, and we documented that and let him know we were going to document that. But at the same time, Paul had a lot of common sense too. And we knew that he wasn't really going to put himself in harm's way. There's no need to try to institutionalize this man. So Paul completed his 120 days, no problem. But his fast stopped working for him around day 90. Like his body had adapted to being in a fasted state. And so, you always have to keep the body guessing. And this is why intermittent fasting is so great. You eat, you don't eat. The body's like, what the heck's going on? It's a balance. And it's that balance that people have lost. There's these groups on Facebook of 60-day fasters. And in some cases, fasting can be very dangerous for 60 days. And in some cases, it's probably not. I don't know. You need to know each patient's story. I could probably fast perfectly fine for 60 days, given what I know about my own health. But it's just counterproductive. So now in clinic, I'm seeing a lot of my patients catch on with these social media fads of fasting for 30 days or 90 days. And so Paul was lucky. Paul didn't have any real negative side effects other than he fasted for an extra 30 days with no real benefit. But these other patients I'm working with are getting some nutrient deficiencies. And that nutrient deficiencies putting so much stress on their body, they're having a huge cortisol response.
Exactly.
So then they have an insulin response. So they're like on day 30 of a fast and they don't understand why their blood sugars are going up, why they're gaining weight. And it's like, well, your body needs nutrients and you can't do that. It's counterproductive. So that's just, when it comes to everything, I've just become so much more aware of this, looking at the checkouts at, pharmacies or grocery stores, it's always like lose 20 pounds in 2 weeks, all these things. People always looking to do something extreme to get extreme results. And no one's patient anymore and just lets things happen step by step. I say to patients, they'll cry and they'll say, it's been a week and I haven't lost 10 pounds. I'm only losing 2 pounds. But 2 pounds a week over the course of a year, it's over 100 pounds. It's an exceptional amount of weight. So it's people need to zoom out, see the big picture and be more sensible.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on Bulletproof coffee?
Bulletproof coffee is a meal. It is a meal. It's, I'm the debate on whether coffee is good or bad for you. The research out there, I know it's a controversial subject amongst different health groups. We, in our clinic, we stand back, we let people have their coffee, but we warn them that they could have a hormonal response. And if they do, we switch them to different sources of caffeine like matcha tea instead. So, or they'll just quit it altogether. So we sort of lay back or lay off of, drink to drink or to not drink coffee. But when you're adding all that fat to it, it's a meal. when you have a bulletproof coffee, it takes the body like 5 to 6 hours to burn through that energy from the coffee. So a lot of people take it in the morning when they fast because I think it, will help suppress their appetite throughout the day. But they're just fueling themselves, like they're not fasting for that 5 to 6 hours
Right.
after they consume it.
What about MCT oil just by itself? Same. So it would be the same, right? It's again fuel.
It is a fuel. It's
Okay.
a fatty fuel. Yeah.
Okay. So in your fast, you don't permit anything that would fuel the body. So that would include any kind of fruit, because some people say, oh, a fast, but I can eat berries or I can eat kind of low glycemic. Okay. So your fast is a pure fast, which means
It's
maybe
a
herbal teas.
herbal teas, maybe coffee if you're okay with it. At
Okay.
the start, bone broth. We encourage that for the first
Okay.
2 weeks.
Okay. Okay. And then after that, you're just on water. What scientific results have you seen? What can you share with our audience, those who are listening, going, is this right for me? Describe the ideal person it's for, and then what scientific results have you seen?
So I think it's pretty ideal for pretty much anybody, giving any condition that they're combating, to work on the timing of their meals and just to give their body a chance to rest and reset. So there's very few instances where I don't think some degree of fasting is beneficial. There's no instances actually. In terms of doing more aggressive intermittent fasting from a therapeutic standpoint, people, that ideal person would be more on the healthier side of things. Someone who comes to us with congestive heart failure, or is on dialysis, we stick to 24 hours of fasting or less. But someone who's going to do more like 36 or 42 hours of fasting, they can still be on a heavy cocktail of medication, but they can cook for themselves if need be. They can get to their doctor's appointments on their own. So people that are still in relatively decent shape despite having a significant medical history. I really think I've worked with all different kinds of people with all different kinds of backgrounds, uh, age backgrounds, different genders, different medical conditions, and just changing around the meal timing makes a huge difference in everyone. In terms of clinical results, we're in the midst of publishing that. We had some issues getting Research Ethic Board approval years ago. Fasting was too taboo, sorry, rather. Nowadays, it's not very taboo, so we have been granted Research Ethics Board approval. So we'll be presenting our data at a conference next year in Colorado. We have some case reports that have been published in the Journal of Insulin Resistance, and we have a case series on a group of patients with type 2 diabetes who are all insulin-dependent diabetics who had full diabetes reversal. And now it's going to be published in BMJ. It was accepted and it's going to be published next month.
Very exciting. Let's talk about diabetes. I've actually heard this from several diabetics who said, oh, we can't do a fasting boot camp, or we can't fast because we have insulin issues. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's counter to what you're sharing here.
Well, with these type 2 diabetics, your bodies produce so much insulin that it no longer utilizes your insulin at all. It's taken offense to your own insulin. It's developed resistance to your own insulin. Just like when you spend so much time with one individual, day in and day out. I'll pick on my husband here for a second. I met him when he was living in California. We saw each other every other weekend for about 3 years until he could immigrate to Canada. So every weekend was perfect. You missed him. Life was good. And now I live with him, and we just got, and I love him. He's a great husband. But we recently, we were on a work trip together, and he had to go on to Greece, and I had to come home, and I'm kind of enjoying my time alone. Like, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and you can get on someone's nerves if you spend a lot of time with them. And traveling for 2 weeks nonstop is that's a decent amount of time. Uh, but so we get overwhelmed, we get overexposed to certain things. Like if you ate steak every day for a month, you probably would get completely turned off of steak. So it's the same thing. Our cells get turned off of our own insulin. So we just our bodies then, are saturated with insulin, and that's how we end up having high blood sugar levels. The insulin's supposed to take the blood sugar and let it into the cell, but the cell won't communicate with the insulin anymore, so the sugar never gets into the cell. So, type 2 diabetics, they just have very, very high blood sugar levels all of the time, and their insulin no longer works. So even though they have insulin issues, their insulin's not going to be driving their blood sugar levels down. If it was, they wouldn't have type 2 diabetes. So they end up having these very high blood sugar levels and requiring medication to help lower the blood sugar levels. So, we really spend a lot of time seeing our patients and educating our patients on this so they understand what the risks are and aren't when they start fasting. So, we tell them, you are going to start fasting, but we're not going to give you the same medications that are going to keep your blood sugar levels down low. We're going to, implement dietary strategies and fasts to burn down the insulin levels and to burn down the sugar levels rather than you taking the medication. And, sometimes if the patient's really skeptical, we'll say, depending on the circumstance, if it's a more mild circumstance, well, just don't take your metformin tomorrow and see what happens with your blood sugar levels. And their blood sugar levels go up a little bit. So if they're not taking their medication and their blood sugar levels go up, if they go up and they fast, they're not going to come down, to a point that's dangerous for them. And most patients realize that. Most people aren't super compliant with their medication. They know if they don't take it and they eat, their blood sugar level is going to go up super, super high. So most people are willing to try it out. Most of the patients that we get are sick and tired of being sick, or they're sick and tired of taking care of sick family members.
Right.
And they're willing to try something even for a day. So every patient that comes into our program does about 6 hours of educational training before they get started with the fasting. So they understand what's going on in the body, and they understand the nature of hyperinsulinemia and type 2 diabetes.
But that's good to know that there aren't significant issues that would prevent someone who's diabetic and on insulin from proceeding with one of your recommended fasts.
No, you just have to be monitored. Someone's got to adjust your medications.
All right, let's talk about the stuff that people don't know about what happens when you fast. For example, I have some friends that did a 7-day fast after Dr. Zach Bush had come down to my home and done a Heal Circle presentation. And one of the things they talked about was the fact that you end up with constipation. They said, well, God, I wish someone had told me that before I did this fast, I need to be careful about what I'm putting in. I shouldn't be having a burger the night before, because that was a tough 7 days. And they both talked about that same experience. So what does someone need to know before they start fasting with respect to what is it going to do to their gut, their digestion, their microbiome, and more importantly, their bowel movement?
So with that, we do see constipation, but we more often than not see diarrhea, because when you first start fasting, your insulin levels drop a lot. And when you have that kind of reduction in your insulin, it signals to your kidneys to release a lot of water. And so you urinate out a lot, but sometimes it's so much water that you have quite severe diarrhea. So we educate patients before they start to fast that if this starts to happen, it's just an early thing to happen throughout their fasting journey. It's not something that's going to persist much beyond the first few days of their fasting. So to utilize psyllium husk as a crutch, putting the psyllium husk in water, letting it sort of soak in water for about 15 minutes and then drinking it, just to help bulk up the stools in the gut and then prevent the diarrhea. And then after about, the first week into fasting, cutting it out. And usually the diarrhea doesn't persist much beyond the first few days. in terms of constipation, if you're not putting anything in, there's not a whole lot to come out in the first place. But most people have issues with constipation when they're fasting because they have problems absorbing magnesium in their gut in the first place. And most of North America has magnesium deficiency. So we find if we can just bring the person's magnesium levels up to normal, we don't have any issues with constipation during a fasted state. So, and it's really tough to actually get a good measure of someone's tissue magnesium levels. And the research that's been done sort of on the general North American population, when they actually do tissue testing for magnesium, shows that we have a huge issue with magnesium deficiency. So we really focus on our patients taking different magnesium supplementations just to help get their magnesium levels up, and that regulates the bowel movements altogether. We encourage our patients to eat a very low carb, moderate protein, higher fat meal. We, in some of the patients, encourage more potassium to be consumed at that meal, things like avocados, salmon, spinach, mushrooms before a fast. And some patients have to avoid those foods depending on their medications and medical history. So we do talk about sort of pre-fasting meals, but keeping the garbage out of the diet for the first few days entering into the fast, starting on magnesium supplementation the first 2 days before entering into a fast, if need be, and then talking about the consequences of diarrhea during the fast.
What magnesium do you recommend?
So for general everyone, we recommend magnesium glycinate or magnesium malate. We start our patients at 400 milligrams, and then depending on their symptoms, we'll move it up if need be. For patients who are just more prone to constipation, I was one of those patients. I use a blend of magnesium citrate and magnesium glycinate. Magnesium citrate gets absorbed by the body fairly well, but not as well as glycinate or malate, so it can trigger some bowel movements too. So when you take citrates, you do get some good magnesium absorption into your system, but you get just enough to push through a bowel movement if something's stuck. So with those patients who are prone to constipation, we usually recommend that they take both the citrate and the glycinate or malate.
What about acacia flower or acacia fiber instead of psyllium husk?
That would be perfectly fine as well. And some of our patients take chia seeds because they just have them at home, and that's also fine for them to supplement with. Your body doesn't actually absorb very adequate fat from chia seeds in their whole form. They just tend to move their way out of your system. So you're not getting a whole lot of energy from that.
Oh, interesting. So on a 7-day fast, you could actually do just soaked up chia seed and that would not interfere with the fast?
Well, not in a super way. It would have some effects on autophagy. It wouldn't be something I'd ever recommend to a cancer and neurological patient. But for someone who's just looking to treat type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, it wouldn't be that counterproductive.
Okay. And what about psyllium husk and acacia for someone who's looking for autophagy?
So that would also interfere with autophagy,
Okay.
not on a greater scale, not on as great of a scale, but it would be perfectly fine while you're combating the initial induction into fasting. So even if I have a patient with cancer and they start to experience diarrhea, it's only going to last for a few days. Let them take some psyllium husk, and then once it's done, make sure that they stop taking the psyllium husk and then go back to water.
Got it. What do you think of Prolon, the fasting mimicking diet?
So my colleague Jason's actually written some blog posts on the fasting mimicking diet. The fasting mimicking diet is done in such a way that you really reduce insulin levels when you are eating. But we've just, I know a lot of people that have used it, it hasn't worked. We don't think it targets the hormones quite the same, and it doesn't force the body to use a sort of energy, especially in people who have very low metabolic rates. I do know many people who have tried it. I've worked with many people who have tried it. And in some cases, the person's healthy enough and has a great metabolic rate, and it ends up being successful for them. But in a lot of the cases, we have very sick hormonally warped individuals with very low metabolic rates. And we've just found that it doesn't work so effectively on really achieving great hormonal regulation.
Wonderful. Well, this has been fascinating, very insightful. What are your last words of advice for someone who's never done fasting before, is considering it? What would you say?
Our motto is progress, not perfection. Simply by not snacking at nighttime, trying not to snack between meal times, listening to your body. If it's morning and you're not hungry, skip breakfast, see what happens to the body. Do it slow and gradually. We always equate fasting to being like a muscle. I was just away from the gym for 3 weeks. I went back to the gym and I'm a very sore woman right now because I decided to pick up where I left off, and I ignored my trainer's advice to maybe just do some stretching and take it easy. And now I'm suffering the consequences of it. Fasting is like a muscle and you need to treat it that way. So if you've never fasted before, start out gradually, cut out snacks. When you're feeling really comfortable with that, then maybe start skipping meals naturally. Let your body guide you, and then maybe try to challenge yourself once you feel more comfortable and you realize that you're not going to go hypoglycemic, that your medications have come down, and then try to do some serious fasting.
Any coping hacks? So I've done fasting. I do intermittent fasting now, which is I eat in an 8-hour window. So I have an early dinner by 6, 7 p.m. and then I'll eat around 11 the next day, which is fine. So this is the norm for me now. I don't even think of it as a fasting. I just think of it, that's how I eat. I did try fasting and I didn't go very far. I actually did the Prolon diet as well and had a really hard time on it. So what coping mechanisms can you recommend, or what hacks work for people like me that I'm on the thinner side? I'm 115, I'm 5'7". And I don't know, I feel like my body just freaks out when I deprive it.
I think the best thing is to stay hydrated and don't forget that sodium is important. So adding a pinch of salt throughout the day periodically to your fluid can definitely help. We often mistake our desire to eat for what our body needs in terms of electrolytes. And it's amazing how patients will say, we're so hungry after we work out, and I'll say, we'll have some salty water after you work out, and instantly they're not hungry anymore. So just be very mindful of electrolytes. Just a pinch here and there throughout the day can help a great deal. Chances are it's electrolytes, especially if you're on the thinner side of things and you're more active, you're going to be burning through more electrolytes. So keep up with the magnesium, introduce some sodium periodically, and that should really help your body not want to eat. If your sodium levels are low, your body's going to trigger you to want to eat so you can get that sodium through food. It's a response by the body to trigger appetite when sodium levels are low. So just give your body what it needs, just the sodium, and see if that does the trick. We'll encourage patients, if you really feel like you need to eat, have some salty water or even have a little bit of bone broth, and then wait half an hour, see how you feel. And then of course eat if you still feel really famished and like it's just too physically, mentally hard for you. But most people have the salt, feel fine, and they're able to carry on with their fast.
What about something like a product like a liquid IV, which also includes sugar in its electrolyte base? So there's, a lot of different electrolyte products out there. Will the sugar in something like that throw off a fast?
Yes, it will. Absolutely.
Okay. So it's just the salt water, not necessarily the full liquid IV type of electrolytes product.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, this has been very insightful again, Megan. Thank you so much. Share some information about your website. And of course, those of you who are listening, please note we're going to put this in the show notes on Health Bootcamp. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, keep in mind, you've got to check out the Health Bootcamp site for the show notes, for the links. All right, Megan, where can people find you?
You can find out information about our program, our podcasts, and our books at www.idmprogram.com. So we have a couple different programs. We have a podcast. We're on summer hiatus right now, but we'll be back in the fall. And my colleague has published a few books on fasting and insulin and meal timing, the obesity code, the diabetes code, and the complete guide to fasting.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. For the rest of you, I'll see you on another podcast soon.
No problem.
If you liked this, make sure you share.